Welcome back to the channel, where we bring you true stories of power, betrayal, and breathtaking comebacks. Today, we unravel a tale that sounds like legend but is all too real, of a young captain they tried to bury in the sands of war, but who rose from that desert to rule a nation. They thought they were sending him to die, but instead they handed him the path to destiny. The heat was brutal. Eastern Burkina Faso, 2022. A place where even the wind felt like fire. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stared at the assignment orders in his hands. It wasn't a promotion. It wasn't recognition. It was exile. He knew it. Everyone knew it. In a candlelit corner of the capital, a group of senior officers had met just days before. Their words dripped with sarcasm. Let's see if the desert deals with our little problem. They weren't hiding it anymore. Traoré had become too vocal, too principled, too popular. He asked questions no one wanted answered. Questions about stolen weapons, vanished supplies, corrupt missions. And so, they dressed up the betrayal as duty. When he received the orders, his commanding officer even patted him on the shoulder. Consider it an opportunity to prove your patriotism with your life. And just like that, he was gone. Flown out with a bare-bones unit, no backup, no real logistics, to face a war zone crawling with extremists. They expected him to disappear. Another casualty, another file marked missing in action. But what they forgot was who he was. Traoré didn't break. He built. From the dust and chaos, he began to gather people. First his soldiers, then local fighters, then civilians who saw in him something rare, a leader who bled beside them. He trained them, organized them, protected their villages when the government had abandoned them. And slowly, the region stopped being a death zone. It became his ground, his movement. He set up makeshift clinics, distributed food, exposed fake intelligence reports, turned ambushes into victories, and all the while he kept records of everything, every failure from above, every betrayal, every resource that never arrived. He was supposed to vanish, but instead, he became a hero. The whispers started in the capital. Traoré is still alive. Then, Traoré is winning. Then came the day no one expected. He returned. But not as a soldier requesting reassignment. He returned at the head of a revolution. Weeks passed, then months, and the man they sent to vanish in the dust, he became legend. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't just survive. He transformed a forgotten war zone into something unimaginable, a center of strength, a stronghold of unity, an engine of resistance. It started small. He reorganized patrols, repaired broken equipment with salvaged parts, and forged bonds with local villagers. Men who had lost faith in the uniform now followed him into fire. Women brought him food and stories of their missing sons. Children stood straighter when he passed. He trained relentlessly, not just for combat, but for loyalty, for discipline, for belief. The desert had been a sentence, but for him it became a classroom. He studied the terrain like scripture, knew every valley, every water source, every shadowed ridge. He mapped out enemy movements not with drones, but with instinct and intuition. And, above all, he listened. To the cries of civilians, the frustrations of his men, the silence in the radio when other outposts called for backup and no one answered. Word of him began to echo beyond the dust. Traoré is alive. Then, more daring, Traoré is building something. But with hope came danger. One afternoon, a coded message intercepted by one of his radio scouts revealed an incoming ambush. The enemy force was triple his size, funded by foreign aid and armed to the teeth. Some suspected the leak had come from his own government, the same people who had sent him here. They wanted to finish what they started. He gathered his men, looked each one in the eye, told them the truth. They're not coming to fight us. They're coming to erase us. Not one flinched. They laid traps, repositioned supplies, turned cliffs into sniper nests, set bait convoys in the dry riverbeds. When the enemy came, expecting chaos, they met precision. The battle lasted hours. Screams echoed through the canyons. Smoke rose like pillars, and when it cleared, Traoré was still standing, bloodied, bruised, but unbroken. They had not only survived, they had won. Someone had filmed the last stand. A clip of Traoré helping carry a wounded soldier while holding the flag with one hand, his uniform soaked in dust and blood, went viral within hours. It wasn't just a video, it was a spark. Soldiers across the country watched and asked the question their commanders feared. Why aren't we being led like this? Back in the capital, the room once filled with laughter, now filled with panic. The ghost they had exiled to die had become a flame they couldn't put out. And Ibrahim Traoré was only getting started. But hope is a dangerous thing when it reaches the wrong ears. The regime couldn't ignore it anymore. The story of Captain Traoré's survival, his victory, and the loyalty he inspired had cracked their wall of silence. And the cracks were spreading fast, among young soldiers, among angry citizens, among families who had buried too many sons. They moved quickly. First came a statement on state TV, praising his dedication to duty while quietly announcing plans to rotate him out for reassignment. Translation: remove him before he becomes unstoppable. Traoré refused. He knew what that reassignment meant. Not a promotion. Not even exile this time. It meant disappearance. Then came emissaries, officers in pressed uniforms smiling through their teeth, offering him medals, fake titles, vague promises of a future in leadership. He turned them all away. He didn't need recognition. He had the truth. And soon he had the proof. From inside the system, from officers who believed in him, came a flood of documents, internal memos, intercepted calls, encrypted emails, plans, signatures, everything. His original deployment wasn't just an unfortunate mistake. It was a deliberate political maneuver, a quiet execution in camouflage. They had tried to erase a man because he saw too clearly, because he spoke too freely. That night, Traoré gathered his core team. They sat under the stars, rifles across their knees, the desert wind scraping their cheeks. He didn't yell. He didn't promise vengeance. He spoke of duty, not to a regime, not to a rank, but to the people, the country. The idea that justice was not just a dream, but a debt. And the men around him, bloodied, hardened, fiercely loyal, stood up in silence. They were ready. Across the country, in cities and outposts, other units began to signal their support. Some openly declared it. Others worked from the shadows. And suddenly, the balance shifted. The old guard still held the palace. But Traoré, he held the people. And when the people move, no palace stands for long. A reckoning was coming. And the desert, once meant to be his grave, had become the forge where a new nation would be born. They expected a rebellion. What they got was a revolution. It came not with chaos, but with precision. In the early hours of morning, power stations, command centers, and strategic checkpoints across the capital were seized, not by brute force, but by soldiers who had once been dismissed as loyal nobodies. They weren't shouting. They weren't looting. They were following one voice, and that voice belonged to the captain they tried to bury. By noon, the presidential guards had laid down their weapons. By sunset, the national flag was replaced, and by midnight, Ibrahim Traoré walked into the palace. No bullets, no speech, just silence, the kind that follows when something has shifted forever. The next day, in a packed military tribunal, the very officers who signed his death sentence were brought in under guard. No uniforms, no medals, just prisoners. He stood in front of them, not as a vengeful man, but as the evidence of everything they tried to destroy. He didn't rage. He didn't insult. He simply held up a piece of paper, his original deployment order, and said, "You tried to erase me, but I became the line you couldn't cross." The courtroom didn't clap. It didn't need to, because outside, in homes, in streets, in barracks and schools, a country was watching the rise of a new kind of leader, one who had no need to scream, because his presence spoke louder than any weapon. Ibrahim Traoré didn't take power. He earned it, in blood, in silence, in the fire they sent to consume him, and from that fire he forged justice. Not just for himself, but for every voice they tried to silence, for every patriot they underestimated, and for a country that had finally remembered how to fight and how to hope.